You are so brave. I wish my generals were as brave as you. You all made history, and you are the real hero.
He was the last man standing in the room of ghosts. Rahus Mish had seen it all, stood behind the most infamous dictator in modern history. Answered his phones, guarded his doors, watched him unravel, and then watched him die. For nearly 6 decades, he stayed quiet, tucked away in Berlin, operating a small shop, blending into the ordinary world while carrying the weight of a world that had collapsed in blood and fire. He had been there not as a general or policymaker, but as Hitler's shadow, not quite friend, not quite servant, but something in between. When he finally chose to speak, the world wasn't ready for what he had to say. He didn't cry. He didn't apologize. What he offered was something far more unsettling. A portrait of Hitler, not as the monster of history books, but as a boss, demanding, polite, obsessive, paranoid, and disturbingly very human. This wasn't just a retelling of history. It was a crack in the door of a sealed room, and the air that came out of it chilled everyone to the bone. Rahus Mish was never meant to become part of the Nazi elite. Born in 1917 in Upper Silesia, he lost both his parents before he was 5. Raised by his grandparents, he was a child of post-World War I Germany, poor, disillusioned, and drifting. By the time he was a teenager, his country had turned bitter and vengeful, yearning for direction. Like thousands of others, Mish joined the SS in 1937, not from deep ideological conviction, he insisted, but out of economic need and youthful loyalty. He wanted structure, purpose, a place to belong. But destiny moved quickly. Within a year, he was assigned to the Leibestandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the elite guard surrounding the Führer himself. At only 23, he found himself walking the marble halls of power, standing beside men whose names would define a century: Goebbels, Himmler, Bormann, Speer. While the world fought and bled, Mish polished phones and stood post outside Hitler's rooms. The job seemed simple, but the proximity to madness had its own price. He became, in essence, the ultimate observer. Not a soldier on the battlefield, the man watching history unfold from behind locked doors. And what he saw behind those doors was not the firebrand order the public knew, but a quieter, more obsessive version. According to Mish, Hitler could be surprisingly polite to his staff, even courteous. He was meticulous about routine times, scheduled reports, nightly briefings. He would pace, mumble, then suddenly explode into rage, only to calm minutes later. He dictated at all hours, feared germs, refused to shake hands, and avoided meat and alcohol obsessively. Mish maintained Hitler's private telephone system. He heard conversations others could only imagine, often transmitting the dictator's orders directly to the field. But even with all this access, Mish insisted that political matters, especially the atrocities of the regime, were not part of his world. That was never a topic, he later said about the Holocaust. Never. He claimed to know nothing. Of the camps beyond vague rumors and explanation, many found difficult to believe, given his proximity to the highest levels of Nazi command. But perhaps the most chilling part of his testimony wasn't what he denied, it was how normal everything had seemed to him at the time. The last days of the Third Reich were nothing short of apocalyptic, and Rahus Mish stood at the epicenter of the collapse. By April 1945, Berlin was crumbling under the Soviet advance. Tanks thundered through the city. Buildings were reduced to ash. Civilians fled or died in place. Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler and his closest loyalists withdrew into the Führerbunker, an underground tomb of steel, concrete, and despair. Mish followed without question. There in the final days, he manned the phones, listened to screams and commands, and watched as Germany's once unbreakable leadership unraveled into paranoia and resignation. He saw Hitler's once unshakable confidence dissolve into delusion, issuing orders to divisions that no longer existed, fantasizing about counterattacks from armies that had already surrendered. Mish described the atmosphere as suffocating, tense, and strangely routine. There were still meals, reports still arrived, orders still went out. But outside, the war was over.
Only the Bunker didn't seem to know it.
On April 30th, 1945, history came to a halt. According to Mish, the event was grimly procedural. Hitler had retreated into his room with Eva Braun. Shortly afterward, Misch heard nothing, only silence. Then came the commotion. Doors opened. A few footsteps. And then the bodies were seen wrapped in blankets, carried past Misch and a handful of others up a short flight of stairs to the bombed-out garden above. There, the corpses were doused in gasoline and burned. Misch did not witness the act directly, but described the moments with eerie detachment. He didn't question the orders. He didn't look away either. The dictator who had plunged the world into war died not with a bang, but with a whimper. No grand speech, no redemption. Just smoke, gasoline, and ashes in a shallow shell crater. The bunker turned quiet. Food ran low. Ammunition was useless. Misch stayed for 3 more days, silent, loyal, and waiting for the inevitable knock-on. The door, when Soviet forces finally stormed the compound, Rahus Misch was taken alive. But his story was far from over. For the next 9 years, he vanished into the Soviet prison system. Labor camps, interrogations, brutal winters, endless questions. He was grilled about everything: Hitler's mental state, inner circle meetings, whispered conversations from behind closed doors. The Soviets wanted secrets. Misch gave them little. According to him, he was just a messenger, technician, a loyal servant with no knowledge of the crimes that had been committed outside his hearing range. Whether that was truth or calculated denial remains debated. What is certain is that when he was released in 1954, he returned not to a hero's welcome nor a villain's trial, but to obscurity. He opened a shop, raised a family, lived in quiet Berlin neighborhoods, as if trying to forget the very thing that made him unforgettable. For decades, he said almost nothing. Silence has a weight of its own. And when Misch finally broke it, the sound echoed through history. It wasn't until the early 2000s, with nearly all his contemporaries dead, that Rahus Misch decided to speak openly. His memoir, The Last Witness, stunned readers, not for its explosive confessions, but for the absence of them. He did not express guilt, did not seek forgiveness. He described Hitler not as a tyrant, but as a boss. Demanding, yes, but also respectful, attentive to detail, and even considerate in private. Misch insisted that politics had never been part of his job, that ideology didn't enter the communications room. In interviews, he called Hitler a wonderful boss. That line alone sparked outrage across Europe. Survivors, scholars, and even casual observers were horrified. Here was a man who had lived within inches of evil and came away without condemnation. Was it denial? Was it trauma? Or was it something darker, a mind so embedded in loyalty that it never stepped back to look at the whole? Misch never answered those questions. And maybe, deep down, he didn't know the answers himself. Rahus Misch died in 2013 at the age of 96. There were no dramatic final statements, no sudden revelations, just silence, once more. His death marked more than the end of a life. It closed the final chapter of first-hand testimony from inside Hitler's bunker. What he saw, what he heard, and what he refused to acknowledge will be debated by historians for years. To some, Misch was a cog in a machine too vast for him to understand. To others, he was a willful participant, passive, yes, but present nonetheless. His story raises hard questions about proximity, responsibility, and the line between duty and complicity. He did not order bombings or sign decrees, but he stood beside the man who did. He answered his calls, protected his secrets. And when it was all over, he chose to remember the office, but not the crimes committed in its name. That silence, that chilling loyalty, may be the most haunting part of all. It began with a sound no one expected. A piece of insulation being peeled back inside an aging Berlin apartment building. The workers were simply there for routine repairs. The building had been abandoned for years, barely more than a relic. From a vanished era, but beneath one section of drywall, something caught their attention: a heavy, airtight metal box tucked deep into the structure of the wall, its presence carefully hidden, its seal unbroken. The workers assumed it was nothing more than old tools or forgotten junk. Instead, they had stumbled onto a document that would send shockwaves through the historical community. Inside the box was a single envelope, yellowed, fragile, but preserved against the passage of time. It was handwritten in German, dated late 2012, just a few months before Rahus Misch died, and on the bottom of the final page was a name signed, in full, Rahus Misch. The letter began with only 6 haunting words. I can't keep silent anymore. In that moment, everything we thought we knew about Hitler's last bodyguard, and perhaps even Hitler himself, was thrown into question. The letter revealed what Misch had hidden for more than half a century, for decades. He had insisted he was merely a bystander, loyal but ignorant servant who had no knowledge of the horror surrounding him. He had gone to his grave defending Hitler, calling him a wonderful boss, claiming never to have heard a word about the Holocaust. But in this final letter, written in his own hand and hidden deliberately where no one would find it until long after his death, Rahus Misch confessed to a lifetime of silence, soaked in guilt. He detailed moments he had witnessed behind closed doors, scenes he said had tormented him in dreams and memories he could never shake. The most harrowing involved political prisoners and suspected traitors, men and women buried alive in remote forest locations. Executed without trial, their bodies never accounted for. According to Misch, Hitler sometimes watched these killings from behind protective glass, sipping tea or taking notes, calm as death unfolded before him. In one horrifying recollection, Misch described watching victims claw at the dirt as they were lowered into the earth, screaming. Hitler, unmoved, simply whispered, "Justice sleeps best underground." That quote alone has sent scholars scrambling through Nazi archives, desperate to verify the language, the context, the chilling truth of it all. But the horrors didn't end there. Misch claimed in the letter that he had witnessed or at least stood present during early poison experiments conducted on prisoners. These experiments, according to him, had been ordered directly by Hitler. Misch described how the dictator would stand behind thick glass and observe the suffering with cold clinical curiosity. Different variations of poison were administered. Notes were taken. Victims were left to die slowly. Misch stated that although he did not participate, he was present, and that presence had haunted him ever since. Yet it was not the death of soldiers or dissidents that shook him. Most it was the story of a child. A young girl, he wrote, had been gifted to Hitler by a high-ranking SS officer, twisted symbol of loyalty. For days, the girl was kept near the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat. Then suddenly, she vanished. Her body was found days later in the woods. The official report labeled it an enemy ambush. But Misch, in the letter, wrote that he always believed Hitler had her killed, perhaps, fearing she could become a liability. Perhaps for reasons even more sinister. The files were sealed. The incident was never spoken of again. For years, Misch carried the weight of that child's silence. And he wrote that her face returned to him often, in dreams he could never forget. As the letter went on, it transformed from confession to torment. Misch described sleepless nights, decades spent haunted by what he had seen. I see their faces at night, he wrote. I hear their voices under the ground. Said that he had told himself for years that he was just a guard, that he had no choice, that he was not part of it. But as time passed, those excuses withered. In the letter, he admitted, I lied to protect myself. But silence is a form of guilt. That sentence may be the most damning of all because for so long his silence had allowed him to slip into the background of history. He had stood inches from Adolf Hitler, lived with him, protected him, worked for him, and yet convinced the world that he was nothing more than a bystander. With this letter, that illusion collapsed. According to experts who reviewed the box and its contents, the container had been meticulously preserved and hidden with the specific intention of remaining undiscovered until long after Misch's death. It had been sealed in airtight metal, padded with insulation, and placed in a section of wall no one would think to open. This was not a spontaneous act. It was calculated, deliberate. Misch may have lacked the courage to speak when he was alive. But in death, he unleashed a truth that now refuses to be ignored, as news of the letter quietly circulated through academic and archival channels. A storm began to form, though no official statement has yet been issued. Multiple credible sources have confirmed that serious, high-level discussions are taking place behind the scenes. These conversations center on three urgent questions. First, can the document be fully authenticated? Second, can its contents be accurately and responsibly translated for the public? And third, should the full letter be released at all? Government institutions and war archives in Germany and across Europe are reportedly involved. The stakes are high, only because the letter contains deeply disturbing claims, but because those claims could lead to further discoveries. Some scholars believe the letter may point to long-hidden documents, unmarked graves, or previously unknown individuals who played key roles inside the Führer's inner circle. Survivors of Nazi brutality and advocates for Holocaust education have called for full transparency, demanding that the truth be shared, no matter how late it comes. But others warn against sensationalism. They argue that rushing to publish the contents without rigorous verification could do more harm than good, reviving conspiracy theories or unintentionally distorting historical record. In the shadows of these debates, the letter waits, and the world watches. Still, not everyone believes the letter is authentic. Some critics have raised eyebrows at the way the document was found, questioning the motives of the construction workers who discovered it. Were they after money? Publicity? Had the letter been planted? Was it forged? The lead worker on the project has pushed back hard against these claims, stating that the box was handed over to authorities the moment it was discovered, and that his team never sought media attention. Regardless, doubt persists in some corners of the historical community. And yet, several independent experts with direct access to the letter have come forward quietly and off the record. They say the handwriting matches Misch's known samples. The paper and ink align with 2012 manufacturing records, and more disturbingly, the events and phrasing described in the letter line up perfectly with facts never made public details only someone inside the bunker. Someone who truly saw would have known. One source said, "There's no way this was fabricated. Whoever wrote it was there. They were listening." The letter has begun surfacing online leaked portions, translations, photos. The world, stunned and silent, waits. And in that waiting, we are forced to face the final truth. Rahus Misch, the man who spent decades defending Adolf Hitler, may have been carrying a dark confession all along, one he was only willing to speak after he was dead. So now the question is no longer about whether Rahus Misch was just a bodyguard. It's whether he was also a witness to evil and chose for far too long to remain silent. His letter may not bring justice. It may not restore the lives lost. But it does something else. It strips away the last illusion that proximity to power comes without consequence. In the end, Misch left us not with an apology, but with something far more complex. A late and brutal honesty. The kind that forces us to re-examine not only what he saw, but what he chose not to say. And so, we ask you, the viewer, what do you believe? Was Rahus Misch a man trapped by history, or someone who hid from it until it was too late to be judged? Should his letter be shared in full with the world, or are there truths we are still not ready to face? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know where you stand. Because as this story continues to unfold, one thing remains. Certain history may have buried its secrets, but eventually someone always digs them up. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.